Imagine waking up one day to find that someone has stolen your inheritance, a piece of land that's been passed down through generations. That's exactly what happened to me. I had inherited a beautiful plot of land from my late father, a place where I spent my childhood and where my family's history was rooted. This land was not just any land. It was a part of who we were, a symbol of our family's legacy. My father had always dreamed that this plot would remain in the family, that it would serve as a cornerstone for future generations. It was more than a piece of property. It was a connection to the past, to our heritage, and to everything we had worked so hard to preserve. Growing up, I spent countless summers running through the fields, playing with friends, and listening to my father tell stories about the land's history. He often spoke about the value of keeping it in the family, about how we were entrusted with something that would endure long after we were gone. When my father passed away, I became the sole heir to this land, and it was my responsibility to protect it. I always promised myself that I would honor his wishes and ensure that the land remained untouched, just as it had been for decades. But one fateful day, everything changed. I was going through some old paperwork, handling some legal matters that I had put off for a while, when I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. Among the stacks of documents, I found a letter from the local government, notifying me that the Homeowners Association, HO, had built 89 homes on my inherited land. At first, I couldn't believe what I was reading. My mind raced. How could this happen? Had I missed something? How could an entire community be built on my land without me even knowing? The more I read, the worse it got. Not only had they constructed these homes on land that wasn't theirs, but they had also forged documents to justify their actions. They had created fake titles, fake permits, and falsified signatures, claiming that they had the legal right to use the land for development. These were official-looking documents, well-crafted forgeries that would have fooled anyone who didn't know the truth. And to make matters even more infuriating, the HOA had sold these properties to innocent buyers who had no idea they were living on stolen land. How could people do this? How could they simply take what wasn't theirs and destroy the sanctity of my family's legacy? I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. How had the HOA gotten away with this? Were they even legally allowed to build on my land? I immediately set out to get to the bottom of it, determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine and to stop them from getting away with this blatant theft. But the more I dug, the deeper I realized the situation went. The HOA had been operating with a level of deception that went far beyond a simple mistake. They had deep connections within the local government, and their influence stretched far. It seemed like no one would stand in their way. As I investigated further, I learned that the HOA had been using their connections to manipulate the system for years. They had convinced local officials to turn a blind eye to their actions, and they had built a network of lawyers and developers to cover their tracks. The homes they had built weren't just a small project, they were part of a larger plan to develop the area, and they had intended to continue expanding without anyone noticing. The worst part? The people who bought these homes, families who had invested their savings into properties they thought were legitimate, were completely unaware that they were living on stolen land. To them, the HOA had been a trustworthy organization, and the homes were a dream come true. They were victims too, caught up in a web of lies and deceit. I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. This wasn't just a matter of reclaiming property. It was about standing up for what was right, for preserving my family's history, and for ensuring that no one else would fall victim to this type of deception. As angry as I was, I knew that I needed to act fast and make sure that the HOA was held accountable for their actions. This was my father's land, and I was going to fight for it, no matter what it took. The first step was to contact a lawyer and figure out how to legally challenge the HOA's actions. But what I didn't expect was how many obstacles would be in my way. The HOA had money, power, and influence, and they were willing to use it all to protect their illegal development. I quickly realized that this wasn't going to be an easy fight. I had to dig deep, gather every scrap of evidence I could, and prepare myself for a long, grueling battle. But I was determined. I would not let them get away with stealing my family's land. It was time to make my stand. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I thought maybe I had missed something or misunderstood the documents. So I gathered my thoughts and made the decision to visit the property, hoping that seeing it in person would bring some clarity to the situation. When I arrived, my heart dropped into my stomach. What had once been a peaceful, wide-open plot of land that had been in my family for generations was now covered with rows and rows of new homes. There were concrete driveways, freshly painted walls, and manicured lawns where there had once been only trees and open fields. The land that had been my father's pride and my childhood haven was now unrecognizable. I walked along the perimeter, trying to process the enormity of what had happened. The sight of these homes that had been built without my permission, stirred up a wave of fury within me. This wasn't just any development. It was a direct attack on my family's history. The HOA had completely disregarded the fact that this land was part of my inheritance, and they had turned it into a neighborhood for sale, without a single regard for the law or for what was right. It wasn't just an illegal construction project, it was an invasion of my family's legacy. As I walked further into the area, I saw the signs for the homes, for sale by HOA, with gleaming new homes standing proud, each one with a sold sticker. It was horrifying. I had to come to terms with the fact that these houses weren't just empty shells. They were being sold to real people, families, who were unknowingly living on stolen land. They were led to believe they were making a good investment, buying a house in a thriving community, completely unaware of the lies that had been fed to them. It wasn't just the land that was taken from me. It was the trust and stability of those buyers that had been exploited. The HOA had sold these properties, and they had gone to extreme lengths to cover their tracks. As I continued to survey the area, I began to understand the full scope of the deception. The HOA had forged documents, creating fake titles, fake permits, and fake agreements that made it look as if they had the legal rights to develop the land. They had presented these to the authorities, ensuring that no one questioned their actions. And because of these documents, the homes were built, the property sold, and the entire process was carried out with little resistance. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. The HOA had manipulated the system at every level. They had bribed officials, created fake documentation, and even misled real estate agents to push these properties onto unsuspecting buyers. These buyers, many of whom had invested their life savings into these homes, were now trapped in a nightmare they never could have imagined. They thought they were securing a future for their families, only to find out they had unknowingly become part of an illegal scheme. I couldn't help but think of all the hard-working people who were now stuck in a situation they didn't deserve. They weren't criminals, they were victims, caught in a web of lies spun by the HOA. Some of these people had moved in just months before I arrived. Others had been there longer, convinced that the HOA was a legitimate, trustworthy organization. They had paid for their homes, taken out loans, and signed contracts, thinking they were following all the right procedures. But now, all of that was meaningless. They were living in homes that had been built on stolen land, and none of them had a clue about the truth. How could they? The HOA had made sure to cover every angle, ensuring that the entire process was seamless for them while making it impossible for anyone to uncover the lies until it was too late. I couldn't just walk away. My family's land was being stolen piece by piece, and the people living there were being taken advantage of. I had to act. It wasn't just about reclaiming my inheritance anymore. This was about righting a wrong that affected not only me, but the dozens of innocent people who were now involved. The HOA's deceit wasn't just a financial theft, it was a moral and ethical betrayal. These families had been duped, and I couldn't stand idly by while they continued to suffer. The rage that boiled inside me was overwhelming. The HOA had taken everything, my inheritance, my family's legacy, and now, the trust of these people. And yet they were walking away scot-free, their pockets full and their consciences clear, at least in their own minds. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The battle ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to fight. For the sake of my family, for those buyers who had been misled, and for the future of this land, I would make sure that the truth came out. The HOA had no right to destroy what was ours, and they would pay for their crimes. legally, financially, and morally. I was done letting them get away with it. The fight for justice had just begun. I immediately sought legal advice, determined to fight back and reclaim what was rightfully mine. This wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about standing up for my family's legacy and ensuring that the HOA's illegal actions did not go unchallenged. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in property law and explained the situation in detail. After going over the facts, he confirmed that the HOA had no legal right to develop or sell the land. This was a relief, but it was just the first step. The real challenge was going to be proving that they had wrongfully taken my land, which meant I had to gather as much evidence as possible to make my case. I spent countless hours combing through old records, digging into the land's history, and collecting documents. There were birth certificates, wills, deeds, and countless family papers that all clearly showed the land had been in my family's possession for generations. I painstakingly gathered all of these, knowing that every single piece of evidence would be crucial to the case. But that wasn't enough. I needed to show that the HOA had forged documents to claim ownership of the land. I reached out to a handful of trusted witnesses who had been around during the time of the original transactions and who could confirm that no one from the HOA had any legal right to the land. They gave sworn testimonies that supported my claim, making it clear that the HOA had acted deceitfully. As I put together my case, I realized that this wasn't just a simple dispute over property. It was a deliberate, calculated scheme that had been going on for far too long. The more I dug, the more I uncovered. I learned that the HOA wasn't just a group of neighbors trying to build a nice community. They were a well-connected organization with ties to powerful developers and local government officials.